So what we're going to talk about today is about the transformations that are happening inside organizations, whether starting small or going big, and explore how organizations are using machine learning, the use cases, the barriers to adoption, and all those kind of things that we want to think about it. Overall, the way I think about AI and the opportunity, if I had a slide, it was a very simple slide. On one side is a little circle that says automating the mundane, so really automating highly repetitive processes. Think robotic process automation here, even though it's not really AI, but that's another day. But invoice processing, stuff that people do with a keyboard over and over and over again. There's that bit. And on the other far side, there's another circle which is automating the complex. So that's really high, really difficult problems. The obvious one is autonomous vehicles. Now, those are quite noisy areas. They're noisy, so the RPA market is a very noisy space because of the huge valuations these companies have got. And then, autonomous vehicles is just for obvious reasons. I mean, Tesla and Elon Musk and everything. It's a really exciting space. It might take us another 10 years to get there. So there's those two bits of automation. And in the middle is a large circle that's augmenting humans to do everything else. And that's where investment is happening, both investment in terms of enterprises investing in this, as well as actual investors investing in companies. And we're going to explore both sides of that. So starting with Dawn, can you explain how machine learning is helping Schneider? And just before you do that, maybe just explain Schneider Electric to people.
Yes. Schneider Electric is a large company, about 140,000 employees in about over 100 countries worldwide. Schneider provides energy and automation digital solutions for efficiency and sustainability. And what we do is we bring together leading edge technologies, combine those with services and software, and also with automation. And we address those for specific customers in homes, buildings, industry, infrastructure, and data centers. And as mentioned, I'm going to be having a presentation later on this afternoon on data centers, specifically preparing your data center for digital transformation and AI ops. With respect to Schneider's use of AI and machine learning, Schneider really looks at these smart technologies as an enabler, and we have a very customer-centric, customer-focused solution that we focus on. So when we are working with a customer, we will bring in AI and ML technologies to enable. But we also pull together for our solutions, we really bring in domain expertise and couple that with the automation, the technology, the software, and the services to bring an overall very customer-centric solution.
Cool. Can you talk a little bit about, I think one of the areas was predictive maintenance and predicting failures. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, that's certainly, when we take a look at use cases, and in my session this afternoon, I do go through some use cases and the approach for data centers. One of the key use cases is predictive analytics, to go through and say we're going to do both condition-based maintenance and predictive analytics on the equipment that's in the data center. So that's a key area of focus and a primary use case that we're driving towards.
Great, thanks. And we'll dive a bit more into other use cases in a second. Norbert, same question to you, really, just a high level, how is it using, and tell us a little bit about Assurant.
Yep. So Assurant is a B2B2C provider of protection products. So for example, if you get a cell phone and purchase a cell phone, you get cell phone insurance, that's us. If you trade in, we're providing that service as well. If you trade in a phone, we're the ones actually purchasing and then reselling the phones. We also provide we're number one in renters insurance in the United States. We also provide lender-placed tracking for loans for banks. So it's always working with a third party. If you go to an auto dealer and you purchase extended service contracts, that's us. If you go to a retailer and purchase extended service contract for an appliance, that's us. So that's kind of the landscape that we're in. In terms of AI, we're looking to improve not just our efficiency, which is one thing everybody looks for with AI solutions, but also our customer service experience. We are servicing the customers of our clients. So if we are going to keep these clients, and these are large clients, whether they're banks, retailers, cell phone manufacturers, or equipment manufacturers, or mobile carriers, So we need to keep those customers happy. And so we're looking always for that combination where the AI will not only bring efficiencies, but also provide better customer experience.
Great, thank you, Norbert. Radina, so you're different from the other two. You have operational experience, obviously, in your background, but you're VC fundamentally, and so you have a different perspective. So maybe just tell us a little about where Glasswing focuses its efforts, and maybe just give us kind of a high-level skim across about how you see AI being used in your portfolio companies, and then we'll get a bit deeper later.
Thank you, Nick. Glasswing Ventures is an early-stage fund investing in B2B software at the highest level, or B2B4C. Sort of our focus areas are, we refer to them as the enterprise, broadly defined, platforms, and cybersecurity. In terms of the investments that we make, we are thematic or thesis-driven investors. So on the enterprise side, some of the focus areas for us are enabling the infrastructure or data as an infrastructure to enable AI adoption, and that looks at anything from multi-cloud, hybrid clouds, configuration of multiple clouds, etc. So sort of that inside all the way to DevOps. We will have themes around identity management as well, and data around in this AI age. We look at funny because we talk about automation and augmentation with the human in the center, so automate the mundane and augment human performance to deliver personalization, whether it's in a user capacity or as a B2B4C, ultimately to your customers. So the example that you gave around Assurant would fall for us if we made an investment within that theme. And then fundamentally, we also look at verticals where we think AI can fundamentally change the dynamics. So supply chain, logistics is an area that we have made investments and will continue to do so. There's a lot of opportunity to both softwareize and also not just get them to a predictive state, which would be an achievement, but actually a prescriptive state of what ought to happen. One interesting thing around, and then on the cyber side, we've looked to secure the data. So data in the cloud, data on-prem, but very much data in the dark web, being able to track and detect where your data is going. And we have a number of plays there, as well as transcending from the physical security, from the cybersecurity to the physical. How do you secure the physical in this day and age, leveraging AI? So it's interesting on the AI question, beyond what Glasswing does, because we have found that if any of our investments or portfolio companies lead with AI, they will get a call with any enterprise in the world, because somewhere somebody has a top 5 priority, AI. When you drill in and try to figure out what it actually means, you ask 5 people, they will give you 5 different answers. So our approach and the way that we lead with our companies is fundamentally what problem are they solving in the typical technology way, and then when we get into the how, are they leveraging deep learning, other techniques, what's going with the data, how do they leverage AI and machine in the what and machine learning and data in combination as the how to actually create value. But fundamentally, they are creating value and solving real problems, ideally with real budgets, big and in the making, and for something that's a must-have.
That's interesting. It reminds me of that old adage, it's when you're raising money, it's AI. When you're hiring people, it's machine learning. Yeah, you describe it differently.
Well, but when you're raising money and you say AI, it means noise. So.
Right, exactly, yes, you have to cut through that. It's also, what you just said, Radines, are interesting. In any area of kind of big change in computing, we're thinking back to cloud and mobility before it, and even like Java in the 90s, all that wasn't anywhere near the effect. People forget that fundamental, why are you actually doing this thing? The early requirements analysis, all that kind of stuff that normal IT projects that are kind of using more mature technologies are just standard practice, and people just lose their heads for a few years and then come back to, I think we've kind of got over the incredible kind of, I don't know, the white heat of hype, I'm not sure. I feel like we have I'm getting a bit more feet on the ground.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I think a few years back the cloud was overhyped and adoption was much slower, and now the cloud is really becoming a reality, and the hype is not quite there, which is a good thing. Yeah. At least for us, we're making bets in this space. But it's fundamentally, as the transition to either hybrid environments on-prem and clouds, or for some that completely make a single cloud or multi-cloud commitment, there are all sorts of ramifications for AI, right? Because when it comes to algorithms and machine learning, at least you have a lot of open source tools. There's a lot available. scalable. As every enterprise races to create their data lakes and all the values in the data, you have the data lakes, so what? And oh, by the way, what's the cost of, how do we bring down the cost of maintaining the data? We jointly with one of the 3 people that are investors in this room, with Graham Brooks at 406 Ventures, have made a co-investment in a company called Chaos Search. And to this very point, what those guys are doing is, keeping data in hot storage, if you will, where you constantly can access, mine, visualize, do whatever you imagine you could do with data in the cloud. It's exuberantly expensive, tens of millions of dollars for months of data. So if you're a large enterprise, you're putting your data in cold storage. Well, how do you bring about the AI reality and machine learning if your data takes 9 to 11 days to move it from cold storage into hot storage, and then work with it? So what these guys have a whole new approach to indexing. So effectively, not on the storage side, but on the data side, they turn, we use the term, they turn cold storage into hot storage, so you basically can mine the data. There is no, at least where they are with the product, there is no AI in it yet, but it's a classic example of a company that needs to exist and has a high potential, because it's a better, cheaper, faster opportunity, so that you can actually take advantage of your data as a core differentiator.
Got it. That sounds interesting. So let's dig a little bit into use cases. Norbert, maybe you start with you. I think we just you have different use cases around claims processing and other areas, and the kind of interesting contrast in use of machine learning and full automation and stuff like that. Maybe you could tell us about some of those detailed use cases.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned earlier, we want to include customer experience improvements as well as efficiency. So a good example of that is when you're submitting a claim. We've built several fraud models, and if this claim is going to be approved, why are you going to go and go through weeks, or typically it's about 2 to 3 weeks to get an approved claim, for example, for renter's insurance? Well, we've now built a model where if this is a safe claim, we have all these predictors, we have plenty of data around historical models, so we are now able to satisfy these claims immediately. So the customer puts in their claim and they fill in all the information themselves, and then they submit it. It does the check. If it's okay, it tells them, okay, you're approved, and it goes ahead and sends them a check, tell them where to send the information to, whether it's direct deposit or whatnot. Now you're providing a great customer experience, and you're having an efficiency play. You don't have adjusters spending time on a claim that's going to be approved anyway. On the flip side, we also are looking for fraud. So we do want to detect fraud. So we have a very small group of what are called SIU, Special Investigations Unit, for fraud detection. In the past, we had a rules-based engine where they would run the analytics, and it would come back, and about 25% of what came out of the rules-based engine was actually fraud. So that's okay. It's better than the typically fraud is like 1 or 2%. So it was better than nothing. But they're spending 75% of their time investigating legitimate claims. That's a waste of a very valuable resource. So now we've added machine learning on it. We're getting very close to basically flipping it on its head. Right now, we're in the 60 to 70% of the claims that they are analyzing are fraud. So that's a lot more efficient for them, and we don't have to hire more individuals to get to the same amount of payback.
Interesting. And Dawn, so you mentioned the predictive maintenance and predicting failure. I think you've got some others as well around audits and other areas, and some unexpected ones that you've stumbled across that you want to share with the audience.
Yeah, sure. In going through and actually implementing this digitization in a data center and taking a look at that AI ops, defining the use cases, we came out, of course, with the traditional use case of predictive analytics around, and condition-based maintenance also around the equipment at the data center. But it was very interesting because as we continued having discussions with the end users and the customers, we found that there was a demand and a pull that started, which is very exciting to see, because adoption is one of the key challenges that you have with AI, and making sure that it's bringing real value to that end customer. So in the conversations we started having, out came from the critical facilities technicians and critical facilities managers, they came up with additional AI-related topics that they wanted. So in another use case, for example, they said, a real problem we have is with our audits. Every year we know we're going to have audits, and these audits take a huge amount of time and preparation. How can AI help us more efficiently and effectively address the demands of the audit? How does AI help us predict what the questions, where the areas of concern might be? How does AI help us do proactive preparation for that audit cycle? So that's a really exciting use case that came out from a customer use and actually was something that initially we were not thinking along the idea of the audit enablement. Another one is taking a look at the day in the life, if you will, of that technician on the data center floor. And remember, I'm talking about a data center here that will have a server room with rack and stack, but it'll also have your in-row coolers, your water pumps, your power system. So all of that is in the picture when we say managing a data center. And one of the things that the technicians came back and said, we'd really love to have something that helps us not only to predict a failure of equipment in the future and therefore avoid it, but also if something happens, real time, if a piece of equipment goes down, we want some help and guidance from the AI system to how to immediately address that in the here and the now. So it's a real-time system that gives you that AI capability. So it's very interesting as you're starting to work with your customers and your end users, bringing back their pull on the AI. And there's a whole question around adoption, but this is exciting to see that pull coming from the end users and the customers.
Interesting. Dawn, just sticking with you, I mean, I thought Norbert's fraud detection use case was an interesting example of keeping humans in the loop, in his case, special investigators. What's your position on the importance of full automation versus human in the loop?
No, it's a great question and highly debated. At Schneider, when you look at our how we have a very customer-centric value that we bring, we are bringing that with bringing the customer-centric view by taking the domain expert, bringing them into the loop, bringing in our automation, bringing a software solution, bringing in services solution, and the technology. So we look at combining all of those to bring the maximum value in a very customer-specific problem or question. So by definition, we are keeping that expert, that human in the loop. I think it's an extremely important piece also to remember that in our solutions, we're looking at our entire ecosystem. So we are going to stakeholders throughout the ecosystem and keeping them plugged in. And actually in my presentation this afternoon, I'm going to be talking about design for controlled and ethical AI, or CEAI, see your AI, this concept of making sure there's visibility points and control points for all the stakeholders in the ecosystem. So it's a very important piece of bringing that AI and the human factor together versus just letting the AI be autonomous.
Dina?
Yeah, and I want to build on that. I completely agree. It's also the case that I don't think we're far enough with machine learning performance for autonomy while we're sort of while we're on a trajectory, perhaps asymptotically, perhaps not, but we're on a trajectory to get there. Today, the performance is not there if left to its own devices. I'll give you a perfect example. Because context matters, and there are the more complex the task, the more the correlation is that you need a human. Operating or automating the mundane is fairly done, and easily done, but the solution does not make. So we have a company called Verison in the supply chain where they go in, all the efforts in supply chain, especially in production facilities, get put on the line not going down because it costs tens of millions per hour at times depending on the size of the facility. What gets missed though is the inventory, the parts inventory, just the systems of record are a mess, the data is a mess. So you could have the same part from 5 different vendors and emergency order it because the line cannot go down. So they've automated all that. They go in and they go, referenced earlier, moving from the predictives to the prescriptive, and they will say for this production line, for whether it's 6 sigma, 8 sigma, whatever reliability you need, these are your inventory levels per parts. Here's how you optimize. This is what you should have going on to advisory mode. Great, and the machine can do all that. What machine doesn't know is that somewhere else in the procurement department, somebody has decided that the minimum order has to be 20 parts. I'm making it up. While the machine is recommending batches of 5. That's context. Can over time that input come in from a separate department? Yes, but to correct in the real time as the data, particularly as algorithms are getting trained, you absolutely need the human in the loop.
And I would add to that, and not only the complexity, but the risk management and the risk tolerance, and then the speed of change. Same reason you need AI, that high speed of change is also a very key reason to keep people in the loop. So managing your risk and then speed of change.
Exactly. The risk of the decisions, for example, we do automatically allow certain claims to be paid, right, because the risk is low, and we've made sure we put barriers on that. But denying a claim is a lot riskier, especially, what the models are coming back with is it's possible that this is fraud because of these reasons, but you really need that human to verify that. So the risk, in terms of the use case, you have to look at the risk of whether you can fully automate or not. And over time, I think you'll see that you can absorb more risk as AI matures.
And I think when we spoke on the phone in preparation for this, Norbert, did you say you get some pressure from some parts of the business to go fully automated, whether it's AI or AI and blockchain or whatever, and you're feeling that pressure. So people, I guess, are understanding the power of these technologies, and maybe they're getting ahead of themselves somewhat. But
the hype sometimes gets ahead of, and they read, and we've done a very good job of promoting. One of the things in the enterprise, I think, Don, you mentioned good, is promoting what AI can do and educating folks on it, because we will get use cases out of left field. They want to automate this entire process, and that's not wise at this time. And so we have to continue that education, getting to those, refining what they understand. Another example is bias, right? So we have to, if one of the things that we want to automate is maybe the pricing of policies and so on, we have to make sure that we don't include bias in those pricing. So we're actively looking at that, but we're looking at what fields do we need to not consider when we're doing pricing in order to avoid that bias.
Right. One thing that would hold back the kind of use of AI in the full automation scenario is bias or lack of explainability. I mean, I know, Rudina, you've got some thoughts on explainability and areas like that. Do you care to elaborate?
Sure, I'm happy to. I think explainability of AI is a big topic, exactly because of the risks and the real consequences of adopting it. And what we have seen in the market is sort of two schools of thought. The big players, the incumbents, if you will, the Googles, the Amazons of the world, actually pushing for a form of explainability, but it's really fundamentally around because they're making a lot of their, TensorFlows and whatnot open source, so it's around what's available for open source to drive the ecosystem adoption rather than a pure play explainability. Fundamentally, to get there, startups cannot deliver on explainability today. So especially with deep learning, by the very nature of bringing together all the various neural nets, it's sort of like making a decision. If I'm driving and I decide to change lanes at that very moment to go to the other lane, am I doing it because someone is coming behind me? Am I doing it because that person is coming behind me and I'm seeing that the other person is very slow? There are so many inputs at the same time, and why am I making it at the very, very moment? Explain my decision-making process, and then let's have an explainable brain. Now, we all know AI and machine learning are very far and very different than the human brain, but I use that example to sort of highlight how difficult explainability is, yet it is extremely important. So where we are seeing some progress is what's coming out at MIT and Stanford around using AI for the explainability of AI. So the best path so far that we see in industry comes actually not from the algorithms yet, comes from getting clarity around data. So in insurance is an interesting topic, and financial services. Why do loans or why do insurance claims get approved or not approved? Let me take the loans example, because we have biases in our historical data. A single mom minority gets rejected automatically by the machine. The machine could care less. It's not that the machine itself has a bias, it's because of the biases in the data. Or what I worry about, which is much less spoken about, is how the algorithms themselves are getting coded, because the grand majority of our coders and developers are male. In fact, I've just written an article called "Is AI Male?" because if you are an assistant, type, a Siri type, it's a female voice, and if you're an IBM Watson and demand authority, you're a guy. Just putting it out there. But I worry about how coding occurs, and because again, it's our brains, it's our approaches, and the biases and female-male brains, cultural differences don't all operate in the same way, and I worry about some uniformity in that, because over the long term it will manifest in itself and not always in positive ways.
So I'm thinking the explainability, a huge topic. I consider this under that space of controlled and ethical AI, where we say we have visibility and control points, and I think there's a huge responsibility we have to demand, as consumers of the AI, to demand that those visibility and control points, that ability to be able to see where the AI is going and how it's making its decisions. And really, that's very similar if you take a look at cybersecurity, where consumers now demand to have secure products, to have secure solutions. And I think that there's a strong alignment. Certainly, cybersecurity and AI are intertwined and will become inseparable, if not already, but that's the future. So I see an alignment with that responsibility for consumers to demand that visibility and control points in their AI. And I also think it's part of our design community's responsibility to make sure we develop it with that in mind, with all the stakeholders in mind, that what type of visibility and control point do they need depend on their role.
But to be clear, I don't know if you've seen one software provider that has AI capabilities that can explain it. If you're using deep learning, inexplainable. Right. So that's why you put back humans in the loop, and we go at the risk conversations. And just to be clear.
That's a good point. Deep learning models, explainability is not there yet. Now, there's plenty of research on it, but the older regression models and decision tree models, there is explainability there. In fact, we depend on that for fraud. For what we do is not only do we get the confidence level that this is fraud or not, but also these are the reasons why. So explainability is getting there, but on those lower end models, on the deep learning models, it's going to take a while.
Yeah, because with deep learning, the feature extraction itself is automated. So you can't, that's taking a lot of the...
That's a tricky bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting though, because people have accepted Google search results and have accepted Netflix recommendations for, in some cases, a couple of decades without worrying about, apart from if you're a newspaper publisher, without worrying about, how it came to those decisions. But now we're actually talking about, earlier with the pharmaceutical, life and death, financial, disruption, all these kind of, once it gets into the kind of the B to B to C issues, that's when it really affects people.
Risk becomes a responsibility.
Yeah. So we talked about human in the loop. Let's talk about humans in some ways out of the loop a bit in terms of job displacement potentially. I mean, it's a bit of a cliche. I mean, I certainly not of the idea that there'll be no doctors in 30 years, which I think I heard here last year, which made me chortle at the time. But there's obviously what are your thoughts on what humans need to do to adapt, or what technology needs to do to adapt to humans? Dawn, do you want to start?
So I believe that AI will not displace humans, but humans who can use AI in their jobs will displace humans who can't use AI in their jobs. So I think we have a major responsibility around cultural change, organizational change, training, bringing people to the capability of being able to understand the AI and use it in their jobs, and really having driving towards that educational component. And that's education for the students that are not yet graduated, but it's also education for our teams and our employees in the workforce that have to just be reskilled or expanded skilled, not necessarily reskilled, but expanded skills to include that AI, use of AI in their jobs.
And I would agree. In fact, Cognilytica had a session earlier this week, and they said that AI is not a job killer; it is a job category killer. I think back about AI is just another form of automation. Back in the 1940s, we had 400,000 switchboard operators in this country.
Yeah.
How many do we have now? It's less than 10,000, and the reason is, and those are just like collect calls and stuff like that. But and the reason is you had that automation. AI is going to do something similar. There are certain job categories that will start to diminish. Now it'll take time. It didn't go from 400,000 to 10,000 overnight with operators. Same thing with AI. It's going to take time, and I think that reskilling is important, as well as attrition. You just don't hire as people leave the workforce.
Yeah, I would echo the same sentiment, and perhaps what I'd add is, in fact, any forecast shows that we will have net job creation as a result. It is, I think of it as redefining what a doctor does, what a lawyer does, because, while today we look for that most experienced doctor to look after us, tomorrow it will be that, perhaps a younger doctor who also has stats and ML and other capabilities to work in conjunction with the machine, which has ramifications, because if we manage to reskill, great, but if we don't manage to reskill, we will see job displacements from certain categories. And I think for the first time, at least in modern history, that displacement will occur for typically highly paid and highly educated white-collar workers, sort of what we've seen in automation, in blue-collar jobs, we'll see in that new category that we're not quite ready to face. So it warrants a lot of thinking, because all of a sudden the upper middle class that has contributed in other ways pays taxes, more taxes, blah, 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 if they do.
We're assuming they do, yeah.
Yeah, but have gone to school, are highly educated, highly trained, are rendered sort of obsolete. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah. So let's switch gears just quickly. The EU, where I live for now, and don't talk to me about Brexit, or I might start crying. The EU kind of sees itself very much as a kind of, it strikes me as the world's digital regulator, the world's internet regulator. It has a track record of doing this, whether it's finding Google or doing all sorts of things. Do any of you think it's inevitable that governments will need to impose some sort of AI standards, or can this bubble up from the community as a whole, whether it be technology vendors or users? Anybody have any particular thoughts on
I think that the regulations around AI will parallel the regulations around cybersecurity. I think and the evolution will happen together, because again, they're inseparable. And if you can see now the types of regulations we have around cybersecurity, and those are policies both in companies and external. So I think it'll be a joint from that perspective, and it'll. So
cybersecurity regulations such as what kinds of ones do you mean?
SOC or?
Yeah, the SOC, right?
PCI and so on.
Yeah. So there are many. ISO 27001, for example, is the one that comes to mind, the SOC, et cetera. Those types of regulations, there's guidance that's necessary. They're high level, so companies can apply them in their own company. I've also heard of companies saying that we're not going to do ISO 27001, for example, but we will be ISO 27001-like. So that type of structure and the demand for it from the consumers, the end users, I think it'll parallel.
It's a bit like GDPR spawned CCPA in California and then Argentina and Japan, and yeah.
I mean, I think that was put great by the speaker we had earlier today. It's a risk profile. So I think you're going to end up seeing certain categories of AI, autonomous vehicles, as an example, healthcare is a great example, that will be regulated, and they should be. Others, maybe not so. Recommendation systems, do we really need to regulate recommendation systems, right? So I think it's really the category, but it's something that governments should start looking at now, because as they you have riskier and riskier profiles for AI. If you don't do it, then you're going to run into issues that are unforeseeable right now.
And my view is that as well, that we will be regulated. It's just a question of when. Typically, regulations lag behind tech adoption, and also what facets. So if it's in a regulated industry, financial services, healthcare, pharma, it'll probably be sooner. And if it's is the recommendation engines. No, you will not see it on the AI side, but you will see it as we're seeing it now on the data side. So some will be around the industry-specific requirements, some will be around data. Do I see somebody regulating algorithms sort of horizontally? Not sure, but certainly how do you access data, how do you use data, whose data is it? I mean, I think between GDPR and what's happening in California, and then the phenomenon of Cambridge Analytica is, I think, became the tipping point in this direction. And honestly, self-interest, right? If politicians, all of a sudden their elections could potentially be hijacked by use of data, all of a sudden they'll take it a lot more seriously. So there is a combination of driving factors that I think we'll see a regulation for sure.